Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Adam Winters. I'm Joe Gould, and we're seeing the introduction of the Ernest P. Worrell character on film in Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam from 1985.
A man called Otto, if he can be considered a man.
Yeah, just a quick overview of the Ernest character. He was the brainchild of John Cherry, Coke Sam's. First appeared on commercials in 1980. Got real popular. People wanted him to appear in their commercials. They would have conflicts, though, because of the initial contracts. They moved him to film and television, and this was the start of a glorious franchise.
Do you think this was put on actual film? It looks like videotape from the rip I watched.
Well, it did appear in limited... I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It got a limited run in theaters.
I noticed they... did you see the end of the credits where... Maybe I'm thinking of the trailer where it said, coming soon to a few unfortunate theaters, something like that. They kind of mocked themselves throughout the production of this.
I didn't catch the trailer, so I didn't see that. Theater-wise, it appeared in Texas and a few Midwest states, and that's it.
No Tennessee? What a ripoff.
Well, I think I know why. They had a budget of $800,000, and John Cherry made the statement that they expected to make the money back in VHS sales.
Okay.
So if you're going to make your VHS sales, you don't necessarily want a theater release.
It took like a year in between. Did they go to video right away?
It looks like 1986, so it took about 6 months.
Yeah. Well, it used to take like 12 back in the day for a movie to hit home video.
Well, it looks like they did it themselves. It was released by Know What I Mean Home Video.
Okay.
In 92, it got a re-release by Good Times. You got a remaster of some sorts by Echo Bridge in 2007. And that was on DVD. And then it's also on the Best of Ernest DVD box set. Not cheap to buy, free to watch everywhere, if you don't bother with commercials.
Yeah, I watched the Voodoo rip, and apparently that's the abbreviated version, even though it seemed to have an official quality to it.
So, I finally saw something about that, and I don't have documentation, like actual documentation. But apparently they added the first scene for the home video release.
Oh, that makes sense.
It kind of does. So we watched it on Vudu. I checked on Tubi. It also had the same cut as Vudu did. And it appears that even though it got a limited theatrical release, it actually does have, DVD, that they pulled it from the theater release. And I don't know how I feel about that.
Wait, they pulled what from the theater release? I didn't quite understand you.
Well, it didn't have the first scene, so that means they had to use the version that was actually in theaters.
It does not look widescreen. It looks a 4:3 picture to me.
Well, there was a few shots where I feel like we weren't seeing what we were supposed to see. So I'm kind of wondering if they chopped it up and made a standard definition. I don't know. It's confusing. Believe it or not a lot of people have written about this movie on the internet.
I believe it.
But yeah, it's a very poor image quality. And matter of fact, halfway through, there's like a glitch in the film. You could see where like it glitched. It's like it's just bad quality.
I wasn't sure. Sometimes there would be a slight freeze, and I just didn't know if that was a transition or what.
Yeah. Probably a little bit of both. And I don't know how I feel about this movie.
Well, how do you think you feel?
So I feel like this presents Ernest as a completely different light. And that first scene really matters.
That came later.
Yeah. So it's probably easier to introduce the idea of Dr. Otto and then talk about the first scene. But Dr. Otto is a villain, very mysterious.
He went to high school.
He has a hand. Yeah, he has a hand attached to the top of his head.
Which is played by somebody else other than Jim Varney, apparently. It's in the credits.
Well, it'd be impossible for him to do it.
I don't know. I wouldn't put it past him.
Well, he's got two other hands. And he is plotting world domination using his Gloom Beam, which I'm not really sure why. It's not a depression beam, but it's an electromagnetic device.
Oh, it is. It's an economic depression beam.
Well, true. But he uses it to launch attacks on financial institutions, and erases their contents, and it basically mixes all the monies together. So they don't lose their money, but they lose the tracking of who owes what to who and who owns what.
Not only that, it can affect physical personal checks and credit cards, as in the physical check and credit card can be affected by this Gloom Beam somehow.
Yes, and this would have been, I assume, towards the... Like, credit cards couldn't have been a huge thing in 85, would they?
it's not Bobby, but the actor who plays Bobby in the future Ernest movies, he's singing the praises of the novelty of the credit card and how he didn't know how they were ever able to get along without it. So I don't watch very many 80s movies that make it look like the credit card is a new thing. Yeah, they're saying charge it or whatever, but this one makes a point to point out the credit card is fairly novel.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine in 85 that an ATM machine was the size of a small car. So to have a device in your store where you could run a credit card, like technology-wise, I would imagine it'd been pretty big.
For that mechanic shop, anyway, the Bobby Tulip's mechanic shop.
Yeah. All that being said, I could be completely wrong, and credit cards have been around since the 60s. It's not something I thought about.
It's like the internet, it's been around a long time. People just didn't start using it until 1995 for the most part.
Well, maybe not 85. This might be late. But, you remember how Kmart and Walmart have layaway?
Oh, yeah.
And you basically just pay in installments?
Sure.
Well, you would also have, charge accounts with these stores, kind of in-house credit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that credit cards were really the transition point from store-by-store credit to Visa and MasterCard having the monopoly.
Yeah, you had to worry about handwritten receipts and holding on to them and all that.
Yeah. What a world.
Mm-hmm. As we know it. The end of the world. That's what Dr. Otto wanted.
Yeah. So Dr. Otto's first target, wouldn't you know, is Cincinnati, Ohio.
The financial capital, Southern Ohio. Yeah, Southern Ohio. Where else to start? She said, of course, that's where you start at.
And they recognize, the banks in Cincinnati, that losing Cincinnati itself is meaningless, but it will cause chain reactions across the world.
Domino effect.
Yes, as illustrated by a domino effect later, literally, where he knocks over a little domino and knocks over a little bigger domino, and so on, until a small dog-sized domino fell over.
Should we talk about Dr. Otto's team or his lackeys? I kind of get them all mixed up.
Before we get there, I'm going to go ahead and, I don't think this is the kind of movie where you go scene by scene, but Dr. Otto has a nemesis, all-American boy Lance Sterling, who is hired by the initial bank to try to end this scheme of chaos before it really gets rolling.
You haven't introduced the riddle yet. He's got to solve the riddle of the Gloom Beam.
I think the riddle is overthought. But I never wrote down the riddle.
But Lance Sterling worries about it the whole movie long. Even after he's found Dr. Otto, he's trying to figure out the riddle to find Dr. Otto.
I'll let you talk about that in a second. So Lance Sterling was born on the same day in the same hospital as Dr. Otto. But while Lance was born to a set of all-American parents set to raise him to be a senator, Dr. Otto, it appears, is his mother tried to abort him and it didn't work.
They bring him in the bag. I thought they would have thrown him in the pond like Danny DeVito's penguin. And the lady brings him in saying he survived. And then they do the little shot of the baby Ernest, which was a character in Hey Vern TV show, the baby Ernest. It's very creepy.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. So this lady comes in, and this alleged nurse, it looks like they're in the basement. And she says, I have bad news for you. It lives. And he drops Ernest out of the bag, and you see the Ernest head, the Dr. Otto head, and a baby body.
And it talks.
10 years later, he kills his parents.
Both of the babies talk, by the way, on the day they're born. So that's a...
Well, we'll go ahead and point out, there's a lot of flashback scenes in this movie, and the actors play themselves, irrespective of whatever age they're supposed to be. So 10-year-old Ernest Otto is Otto, and 10-year-old Lance, played by Lance. There's really only one character in this movie who is a normal character with a normal personality that's not absurd, and that's Lance's partner. What's her name? Doris.
Doris. So the actors, very interesting, because, even though Jim Varney is the star of this, the protagonist, Lance is played by a guy, I think, named Mike Mueller, but he spells it with a Y. Mike with a Y. And Doris...
Yeah, I've never seen that spelling before.
Doris is played by a lady, I can't remember her full name, I think it's Janet, but she's in three other Ernest movies. She's Animal Control Officer in Christmas. She's the judge in Goes to Jail. And she's the middle school teacher in Scared Stupid. So I had never really paid attention to the actress's name Welch. Janet
Yeah.
Welch.
Well, Jackie Welch.
Jackie, I still can't
Yeah.
figure it out. Yeah, Jackie Welch.
But I
But
got it. I got it right in
unfortunately,
front of me. So.
Mike Mueller, I think he does appear in a couple other Ernest movies, but he dies in 1991, I think in a car crash. So that's very unfortunate.
Oh, man.
There are a few parts in later Ernest movies that I thought would have been perfect for Mike Mueller to do his Lance Sterling bit. But yeah, unfortunately, he wasn't around for those.
Yeah, he's very Ernest-esque in his personality in this movie. Not a complete copy, but just his version of stupidity is definitely in line with Ernest's.
The problem is he's not near as likable, though.
Oh no.
That's a difficulty this movie has. It does not have a likable protagonist. There are several points in the movie where you kind of root for Dr. Otto, just because he's more fun to watch.
You're just saying that because it's girls.
Well, he kills like 2 of them, doesn't he? The Goomba ladies?
I think he only actually kills one.
It confuses me because he sacrifices one to the dump, apparently. Doesn't he?
Yeah, I may have miscounted. I felt like there was 3, but for the sacrifice to the dump, there would have been 4.
So the main henchman is the robot he built back in grade school, which has the bucket head with the smiley faces. Is his name Willie, the robot?
Yes. According to Wikipedia, his name is Slave Willie. I don't ever remember Slave being mentioned in the movie, though, so we'll stick with Willie.
So one of the hench girls has a hero turn, and I think her name is Tina, right?
Yes. Yeah, played by Esther Houston.
And there's another girl who's sort of, I don't understand her role, but when Dr. Otto transmogrifies himself into various alternative personalities, she sort of gives him a code that helps him figure out what to say next. And her name is not Tina, but I think the actress was named Tina.
Yeah, I think her role was eye candy. And
well,
I didn't quite understand that bit, by the way.
Yeah, it felt like a deleted scene where she keeps saying, does she say ruddy or ready every time?
I think it's ready, but she doesn't always say ready. She occasionally says a different word.
Yeah.
And it's not the word, at first, the first scene, by the way, Dr. Otto's dialect is very hard to understand. So you're kind of a half step behind trying to interpret said dialogue as they're talking.
He has
so the first couple times, I thought that she was giving him the word that he needed to use to play the character. And then I realized, no, he's stopping until she says the word. So I don't know if it's just his pace that she's helping or what.
It feels like we missed something. And I don't know what it would have been that we missed. Because she's helping guide him. But I don't know what happens to her by the end of the movie. Because Dr. Otto vaporizes one of his girls. But I think it's a different one. I think he calls her Monique.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't write down a bunch of names. So, just one more thing. So, as we're talking about this stuff, it might make a little more sense if you haven't watched the movie. But basically, this movie is a series of sketches where Dr. Otto tries to capture Lance and Doris by stepping into the changing coffin. And that transforms Dr. Otto into a various Ernest P. Worrell character, many of which reappear in future stuff. And then you see a little mini adventure of how Lance and Doris foil the scheme. And each of these schemes is basically Otto using one of his girls as bait to capture them, but then they always get loose before they're taken out.
Except for that lady who got eaten by the dump. And then I'm also wondering, where did Dr. Otto, in his pirate version, get the other pirates from?
Well, he rented them, obviously.
Okay, I'll buy that, yeah.
He rented the children for the militia.
He did, yeah. That was actually in the credits, some kind of Tennessee camp.
It was a Boy Scout camp, basically,
okay. I think.
Yeah.
How great would that have been to
it was
be an extra in those movies?
What do you call those?
Militia?
He has the numbers. What do they call them things?
Troop?
Yeah, Troop 287 or something like that.
Okay, sure. Huh.
So the characters that he plays outside of Otto is Rudd Hardtack, who is an Australian trainer of child militants, Jack O'Cockney, the pirate captain, Auntie Nelda, the old woman who has a bad son, who appears in, I think, pretty much every Ernest movie, just about, and Guy Dandy, wealthy playboy.
Oh, man. When you're watching, I'd say especially that Guy Dandy bit, but Are you disappointed Jim Varney never got to be a Batman villain?
I don't know about that. He would have fit in the '60s show. I don't know if he would have fit in the '90s
By
stuff.
the time you get Jim Carrey doing all his tomfoolery, yeah, Jim Varney would have fit right in.
Here's the problem. By the time he would have been a Batman villain, he's already Ernest at that point.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And he also plays as Ernest P. Worrell in this movie for a few scenes, but he's uncredited.
Yeah, I wondered about that. It would suggest it's not the real Ernest to me, is the idea.
Well, I mean, so on the VHS release poster is a picture of Ernest in his costume looking at the film. It says, "Hey, Vern, I'm in a new movie. Know what I mean?"
Is it the VHS release? Because then it would be the real Ernest at the beginning.
Well, so now that we've talked about all that, we can go back to the initial scene and it makes a little more sense. So at the end of the movie, if you're watching the theater release, apparently, you have Dr. Otto and he's transforming all these characters. And obviously, eventually he gets foiled at the end. And then we have a scene at a gas station where the heroes of the story are pushing this car trying to find a place to get gas.
We should point out only the women are pushing the car. Lance is steering it.
Yeah. And all of Otto's lackeys are the workers at the gas station, robot included. And then Ernest comes out and asks them if they need help, but he turns them away because they don't have any money. I don't think he had gas either.
Well, that's the problem.
But
they haven't had gas since the money went bad. It suggested the economy is still in ruins, and none of the gas stations have gas.
Okay, yeah. And he basically said, well, maybe he did have gas, but he says, "No Monero, no Petro." And then they leave, and then he takes his hat off, and you see the Dr. Otto hand on his head. Yeah. So anyways, with the movie, it appears that you have Dr. Otto using the machine to appear to be Ernest P. Worrell. Possibly the actual, possibly the not. But that's all flipped on its head in the VHS release, because the scene's added, and Ernest starts off the movie right after the dedicated to our mentor, Elmo Williams, who I don't know if they actually ever met.
Did you see
Couldn't find anything one way or the other.
Did you see the very last line of the credits said, "Elmo will try to do better in our next movie"?
Yeah, I did see that, yeah. And so it goes from that dedication to Ernest showing off to Vern a new device that he bartered off a guy called a changing coffin. And he asks Vern to flip the switch so he can show him how it works. And Ernest gets pulled into the machine by the hand that ultimately is on Otto's head, which really makes that make a little more sense. So in this version, Ernest becomes Dr. Otto. But the problem is you have the flashback of when Otto was born. So it doesn't really work.
Well, even in just the opening sequence that was added, it suggested Dr. Otto gave that to him. He sold it for the Chevrolet because he imitates his voice and the way he was talking.
Yeah. It could have been, Otto's father. I don't know. Anyways, it just creates...
He's dead. The father got blown up.
But if you take this for granted in the first scene, it's almost as if Ernest becomes Dr. Otto, which is what I think they're going to do with the graphic novel, by the way. As like an alter ego.
He's on the cover, Dr. Otto is.
Yeah. But at this point, if that's what happens, then Ernest is a very bad man.
Well, every Ernest movie is its own continuity, with its own little family history. So, it is possible in this movie you could have a self-contained Ernest Otto alter ego, but I'm not one who believes there has to be one Ernest canon. I just don't think that's a good idea. Like, the Three Stooges, there's not one canon. Everything is sort of its own self-contained history.
No, I agree with that. It's really weird. If you've watched all the other Ernest things first, and then you come back and watch this, it's like, man, this is pretty dark.
But funny.
for Ernest, I should say. But yeah.
I feel like the TV show really ties this together somehow, because they're both individual characters in the TV show. That would probably be the real important link to try and establish a relationship between these two Varney characters.
Yeah. It's just hard to watch an Auntie Nelda scene again, though, man.
Puts a little twist on it, doesn't it?
Makes you think in the Christmas movie, says, "Wouldn't you know, I had 2 children, and the good one died." It's like maybe she was the one to kill him.
What's the name of her made-up son in this movie? Heimlich?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, the Riddle of the Gloom Beam.
So, because of the way that Dr. Otto speaks, and it really is hard to figure out what he's saying, you watch the first 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, it's really hard to figure out what's going on.
It doesn't help the video quality is so bad.
And I don't know if my eyes just adjusted, but I feel like the lighting got better for his lair later in the movie.
You can tell they put a lot of work into the Otto lair, and it's just disappointing. You're really not sure what's going on, because it reminds me, you remember the late 80 Nintendo commercials? It might have been a Capcom commercial, it might have been a Nintendo commercial, but every time they debut a new game, they'd suggest it came out of their testing lab. And their testing lab looked like some mad scientist lair. And Dr. Otto reminds me of one of those late 80s Nintendo commercials.
No, I can go with that. It's different. So where do you think they spent $800,000 on this?
The lair, for one thing. And the costumes.
Oh, come on.
The costume
Those costumes. One of that girl's headpieces was using hangers.
Okay, there are some visual effects in this movie, right? Just when he's the dandy Ernest and he's shooting the little laser. I don't know how easy that would have been to do in 1985 on the cheap.
How sad is it that this movie has better special effects than Fantastic Four 1990?
Well, what was the budget on that one again?
It's like $1 million.
So that was done cheaper then. If it's 93 and they're spending $1 million on it versus 85 at $800K.
I don't think there's a lot of inflation between 85 and 90.
You're right. It was the Reagan years, right? So that's.
But yeah, 800,000. I don't see how they spent 800,000 on these movies. Each costume had to be like $500. Maybe not Ernest, but
do
the rest of
you
them.
Pay all the extras, the little camp kids, and maybe it's a location thing, going to the different.
Filmed at Nashville.
Yeah,
it was shot in Fall Creek Falls State Park, Boxwell Scout Reservation in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't think they had to break the bank for that.
Did they go through a lot of vehicles? How much did they tear up that one car?
Well, I don't think it was in great shape when it started.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't know what would have been most expensive on that.
I mean, they put this in perspective on the special effects. There's one scene where Tina's helping Lance and Doris escape a trap, and they use a transporter device, which is it's literally a gray tarp.
Yeah,
that she puts over the top of them. So I mean, you're talking what, $5 back in '85.
It looks like something out of a '60s Star Trek episode. A little transportation tarp. Transporter tarp. I feel like the warehouse scene is really well done for the little chase bit, and then
I agree, though. I was a little like, you have Guy Dandy or whatever, the wealthy playboy. They're trying to make like a cocktail kind of scene, and it's in this warehouse / garage looking place. It's like, I don't know. I was kind of distracted by the fact that the background for this place was not a real place.
Oh well.
Well, in all the other scenes, it kind of worked. They were in a swamp. They were, in a militia daycare.
It's a little odd because they corral the heroes into an elevator shaft, and they drop them all the way down, and they arrive at Otto's lair. Just like that.
Yeah, well, didn't they stop somewhere else first, and then like Lance hit the wall, and they dropped the rest of the way?
Maybe. I've forgotten that bit. He starts to have a panic attack at one point, and Doris hits him, and he complains.
Yeah, it's his. He's turning into a baby face, and then she slaps him to get him to come to because she doesn't like to see this version of him. Apparently,
even worse than regular Lance.
Yeah, then he goes back into jerk mode.
It's funny because most of this movie are the heroes are trying to solve the riddle that Dr. Otto gives over his initial television broadcast in order to find Dr. Otto in the Gloom Beam, and yet they keep running into Otto in his various alternative personalities, not realizing it's him, and they have their little adventures, and they keep trying to solve the riddle every step of the way, even though Otto has suggested the riddle's a lie before he even gives the riddle. And yet, I think most of the costumes and the alternate personalities, I think they probably relate to the riddle somehow, so it's like Otto is doing all these elaborate disguises just to help the riddle make sense.
Did you write down the riddle?
No, I barely understood what he said, but you have the one saying, the gag that gets repeated over and over again, that which has an eye that does not see, so the pirate, right, not Mr. Potato Head.
Though Mr. Potato Head is mentioned frequently.
Twice, yeah. And there's a line about he having been a she, which I assume is an Auntie Nelda reference. And there's a reference about Santa Claus's pole being inverted, which may be a reference to the Australian personality because he's down under somehow. I don't quite understand it, but it seems to me the disguises play into that riddle, even though they don't really have to.
I looked all over the internet for about 20 minutes, and I don't think anyone has written down what the riddle was.
Well, you can go fix that on the fan wikis. Just play it back and type it on a fan wiki somewhere.
I don't know if I'm motivated to do that.
Yeah, but it's odd because the only reason they're able to figure it out is because Otto is giving them hints, making his riddle mean something as he goes, and eventually just brings the heroes to his lair anyway.
Unclear if it's on purpose.
Yeah.
And then in the lair, you have in the final battle, you have all the personas there with Otto, going after Ernest and Doris.
How they pull that off?
Doris spends most of her time with the robot.
How does Otto do that?
I don't know, unless it's more of a cloning machine. But it's not necessarily any more ridiculous than when Ernest is, going back and forth between the characters in the other movies talking to himself.
In the Christmas one, there's transitions for that. It shows how he does it, but...
Well, I meant like in Scared Stupid when he has they're talking about the high ground.
Right.
He's got 3 or 4 characters yapping with each other.
Uh-huh. Huh.
I mean, it's more absurd than that, but it's in the same vein.
Yeah, so. Okay. I'll give you that.
So is this an Ernest movie? If you're listing up the Ernest theatrical films, should we actually start with Dr. Otto?
I'm going to say no, because I feel like Ernest is being used as a promotional mascot. I feel like he's the Cherry and Coke who's the other producer? Was John Cherry?
Coke Sam's.
I feel like Ernest is the mascot, and they're trekking the mascot out to try and get people interested in their new film studio. So you talked about how in the world did they think this was going to make money. Obviously, you got the video sales. But I look at this as something of a proof of concept so that they can at least show a potential studio that they can make a movie if they need it, if somebody were to back them and they had the right script.
Okay.
But it is in the Ernest universe, if that makes any sense. A lot of these characters get worked into later Ernest properties. But for this one, I'm going to stick with more of the proof of concept, with Ernest being the company mascot who cameos.
Yeah. It's not exactly the same thing as, say, The Simpsons appearing as a short at another television show before becoming The Simpsons.
Tracy.
The show
what's it? The Tracy something? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But it's not exactly the same thing as that, because he did exist in commercials. Yeah. Like, it wasn't that he was created for another show and he became it's not like Frasier.
No.
Coming over from Cheers.
No. Ernest came first. He's the mascot. But Cherry and Sam's are trying to transition into film, and they are using Ernest.
It's an odd way to do it.
It is, yeah, no doubt.
So apparently Coke Sam's also produced another movie called Existo, which is apparently in the same kind of vein as this movie. So I'm kind of interested in that movie now.
I've tracked that down.
But without Jim Varney, I just question the quality.
Yeah, it's hard to think about these movies without Jim Varney, because, man, how bad would this be if you didn't have Varney playing Otto to keep this thing moving? If all you had was Doris and Lance.
So it's real funny. I stumbled onto an interview with Jim Varney it was between Ernest Goes to Camp and Saves Christmas. So it was a few years later. And he's on this, probably a talk show, but it's kind of got the vibe of like a Southern talk show, cooking show kind of thing. And he's doing this interview with this real country lady, and he's dressed like a regular person. He's got a really ugly sweater, but probably standard vein for that day. And I guess it's around Thanksgiving. And she's just basically remarking about how funny the Ernest Goes to Camp movie was, and how they're looking forward to Ernest Saves Christmas. He basically gave away the whole plot, minus trying to find a new Santa, by the way. And then she asked him, so was Ernest Goes to Camp your first movie? He says yes. And then he says, well, hey, I did play in Dr. Otto. He's like, but that one was weird.
That's true.
And I can't even imagine if she'd had follow-up questions about what the plot of that movie was.
Dr. Otto.
He's like, I played an evil scientist with a hand on my head, and I had 4 pretty girls not wearing much walking around the whole time. And,
And a robot with a bucket head with the smiley,
yeah.
changeable smiley faces for
Yeah.
expressions.
It's like, even by Ernest standards, this movie is absurd.
I like it, though. I mean, that's, I'm trying to think what I like most. You know, the little financial humor is clever for the 80s.
That is aged very well, by the way. The satire about the financial systems is aged very well.
Yeah, we always have some kind of crisis, whether it's a recession or a depression or something. Let's see some of the other plot threads that maybe are in this movie, but maybe they disappear. The one guy is about to shoot himself in the head, right? One of the bank presidents.
Yeah.
He puts it in his mouth.
Now, I don't know if they could do that. I don't know if they would do that scene today. Maybe they would. It doesn't fit into an Ernest movie, though.
They did that sort of stuff in Looney Tunes, by the way. Mickey Mouse occasionally would put a gun to his head. Not so much the cartoons, but the comics. Let's see.
So when you first saw this movie, was it unclear to you whether or not the plot was foiled?
Yeah, because the bad guy has his lair destroyed, presumably his machine destroyed, but he seems to have done most of the damage he wanted to do with it, and he's still active with a few henchmen, I guess awaiting his next move. Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, it was almost like, did he actually cause the world's destruction, or did his little Castle Grayskull fall over? And so Lance at the end has to choose between the right button and the wrong button. And by that, that's how they're labeled.
Yep, green and
he
red
chooses
even.
the right button because he's always been taught to do the right thing.
Yep.
But then you have all kinds of heck break loose. Bolts are firing everywhere. Lair self-destructs. You assume they're all dead at that point. And it's like, did they just blow up the world? Because Otto is unclear if Dr. Otto got away.
It certainly seems he got away because he's able to transmogrify himself again.
Yeah, but then they go to the scene at the gas station, which is basically the world's kind of a dump, it looks like. So it's like, well, I don't know if they won.
The other subplot is Lance is very much interested in finding a phone booth for most of this movie, and he never finds it, so far as I can tell.
No, they're still looking for it at the end, I think, when they roll the car off.
With a car with no gas, still looking for a phone booth. Who was he going to call? The bank in Cincinnati?
Yeah, because initially he wanted to make a phone call to figure out where he was at, so they could get back on the right track, right?
I don't even remember.
Well, they got sideways in the woods, and they were trying to figure out which direction they were.
I like when Lance made a fishing line out of his sweater. That was kind of funny. Just a little odd stuff there.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they had him not win his Senate bid.
What was the plot on that? Because it sounds like there was a lady, maybe an ex-lover he was really bitter about, and I couldn't quite make out the dialogue at that point when he was talking about his failed Senate bid.
I think I must have blurred that out. I didn't catch that. All I know is he refused to kiss Tina over and over again.
Yeah.
Now that makes a little more sense with what you were saying, because I was trying to figure out, are they trying to allude to something?
He ain't quite a red-blooded
in
American
a 1985
male
kind of way.
Not 100% there. Yeah. Because it's weird because he definitely I don't know if he likes her, but he likes the attention she gives him, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is some subplot about his failed Senate bid that I didn't quite catch, but there's something there with maybe an old flame.
So I don't know what else we want to chat about in this movie, but maybe we should go ahead and give it a rating.
Oh. Hands on heads?
I don't know. That doesn't seem...
Riddles? Gloom beams?
Right buttons?
Yeah, right buttons. I'd give it 3 out of 5 buttons myself. It does do what it says it's going to do, even if it doesn't seem to have to do that. It's a movie that doesn't quite know what it wants to be, but it at least has a fun time getting from the beginning to the end, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time going up above 2.5 buttons.
All right.
And mostly because I couldn't understand a lot of the dialogue, which is a very fixable problem.
Yeah.
If it was a little bit cleaner, even for an indie film, I'd say 3. But
all right,
I'll do 2.51, so it officially gets a thumbs up.
Mm-hmm.
So you got any other thoughts on this movie?
Well, perhaps we'll see more of Dr. Otto in the graphic novel, The Dreamstone, right? Ernest in the Dreamstone.
So which one? Let's take Auntie Nelda out of the equation. Hardtack, O'Cockney, Dandy. Which one's your favorite Ernest persona in this one?
They're so similar to characters he does elsewhere. Each one of them made me want to see a full movie with Jim Varney doing something like Jim Varney in Treasure Island as Long John Silver. Or, again, that whole bit with the dandy, Guy Dandy, it just made me want to imagine Ernest in the Adam West Batman show, just doing all those bizarre things.
You know, Ernest would have been a good Muppets villain.
Ooh, it'd be perfect. Yeah, Tim Curry was Long John Silver in Muppet Treasure Island, but yeah, Jim Varney could have worked into the Muppets, no doubt.
I think Jack O'Cockney, the pirate captain, was my favorite because he carried around his wood leg like it was a staff.
And you know, at one point he even says his good eye was taken out. So even the eye that he has, he can't see. That's why it goes to the riddle, the one eye but can't see, not Mr. Potato Head.
Now, I will say that he was my favorite character. I like the child militia as the best scene. That was fun. I'm pretty sure in 1985 those were probably real guns.
Yeah, it's something. I did not quite understand. So after Dr. Otto transmogrifies into these different personalities, it seems like each one has its own motivation. Like when he's the pirate, he really seems to want to trap the dump, even though we don't know anything about the history, but apparently Lance has history with the dump, who's also, I think, voiced by Varney. The dump is.
Yeah. Did you catch the mellow yellow can on the dump? He was basically a black trash bag with stuff attached to him.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I like that. Yeah.
I wonder if they got paid by Mellow Yellow sponsoring the dump.
I didn't understand any of that, but it was amusing.
No, it made no sense. It was Monty Python-esque.
It was something out of Monty Python. That's fair.
Well, Adam, you got any other thoughts?
I don't think so. Other than, I recommend all the Dr. Otto scenes from Hey Vern television show. There's a few clips on YouTube. Talking about talent. You know, Beethoven had talent. Picasso had talent, I think.
Hey, so would you recommend someone, if you were going to have someone watch this movie, now that we know about the extra scene at the beginning, would you encourage them to watch that first?
If they're an Ernest fan,
it does kind of change the movie.
If they're an Ernest fan, sure. If not, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Well, I meant, like, would you encourage them to watch the scene before or after they watch the movie?
No, I don't think it's essential to appreciate this movie anymore. I might encourage the trailer, though. Just watch the trailer at least before watching the movie.
I feel like the scene at the beginning could almost be a distraction from the movie because you're going to get confused once you see Baby Otto.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty good scene, so it's not like the scene you want people to be distracted at. That was actually a pretty good flashback. Well, I wonder if we'll view Ernest Goes to Jail any differently now that we've seen this.
You will. I don't think I will. You know, it's another evil Jim Varney. So Ernest's world is full of variety of clones, and he has a very weird family tree. His family album.
Who do you think the Ernest Prime is?
Ernest Prime, huh? Well,
yeah, the key Ernest.
You're talking about a whole Crisis on Infinite Earths business there, so I'm not quite sure how to interpret that.
It's obviously, if these are all their own continuities, then you obviously have a multiverse going on.
Well, the Prime Ernest.
Is it Mellow Yellow commercial Ernest? I'd be good with that. All right. Well, that was Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam, which is not so much about a riddle. And I recommend checking it out. It's 90 minutes. I don't recommend spending money for this movie. It's just too much. I do recommend checking out the art for the VHS stuff. It looks pretty neat.
Oh, yeah.
And very graphic novel-esque.
Yeah.
But, yep. All right. Well, that's it. You know what I mean? Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.